it is important for us to understand not just what's relevant for ourselves, but also what was relevant for at the time in which a text was produced.
Well, this is literary criticism all over again.
Yes.
You need to be able to understand it and think intelligently about it and understand what it's doing. That doesn't require you to use it, but it does require you to listen. I really want artists to be able to make a living doing what they do.
Yeah.
And the best way to future-proof that is to do something that computers can't.
Jocelyn Matthews, an artist, Appalachia native, and Orthodox Christian, and I met a little over a year ago because of my day job and became fast friends as we realized that we shared a lot of common interests. Interests that spawned conversations I thought be great to bring to the podcast. In part one of our conversation, we will wrestle with what it means to be a Christian in the world of AI. We'll just start with this question. What are you currently reading?
Well, on my bedside table is The Language of Creation by Mathewes and a book on the Cathedral of Chartres, which I just had the amazing privilege of seeing not too long ago with the author himself, Malcolm Miller. So I am looking to pair those two books together very intentionally because the stained glass at Chartres tells the biblical stories from a medieval perspective. And Matthew Peugeot's book is all about symbolic thinking in the Bible. So hopefully by reading those two things right before I go to bed, maybe it'll rewire my dreams in my brain a little bit.
Yeah.
A little bit of intentional coaxing going on in there.
That's interesting. I've been currently going through 3 books simultaneously. The Medieval Mind of C.S. Lewis by Jason M. Baxter. The Discarded Image by C.S. Lewis, which is about his approach to the medieval cosmology, and Planet Narnia by Michael Ward. And all of those are about the way that Lewis sees the world and the cosmology thereof. So I've been doing a similar exercise trying to like tap into the medieval perspective recently.
Well,
so.
yeah, it's such a different way of thinking. I did actually study English literature was one of my degrees. And so I remember reading medieval mystery plays and Beowulf and Old English. And so the pagans and the medievals actually think very similarly to some degrees because they coexisted, right?
Yeah.
And so it was interesting to see all of that fit together in my older studies back in the day.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
So any takeaways from that pairing as of right now?
I'm very early on in the book, and I keep, like a good Christian lady, I keep my Bible next to me and I try to read it before bed. So it's very interesting to read the Psalms or read scripture and then delve into this way of thinking about the universe of symbols. And I know we may come into this topic a little later in the conversation, but I am actually having some misgivings or some unsteadiness as I'm reading the language of creation because I've studied the history of artificial intelligence a little bit, like the ways that software engineers and computer engineers have tried to construct an intelligence. And symbolic thinking was one of the first ways that they tried to construct it by using a language of symbols. And so the illustrations that Matthew is using, and I'm saying Matthew instead of Peugeot because he has a brother, Jonathan Peugeot, is very well known. So Matthew's using these symbols that resemble to me similar diagrams that I've seen in the software engineer descriptions of how confidence work and other processes, although they're very different ways. The way that AI has been built now is not at all on a symbolic structure. It's on a probabilistic structure. and I'm way oversimplifying, and I am not a software engineer. So I'm approaching this having read all of this very modern thinking, and of course I'm going to try to walk into it without as much of that as possible, and remembering that this is a return to something. But if we've learned anything about studying history, and if I've learned anything about studying history, it's that things kind of move in a spiral, and we return to old ideas and we believe that they're new. And as Ecclesiastes says, and as my mother always reminded me, there's nothing new under the sun. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I think this is kind of a natural. Can we explore that AI question a little bit more?
Sure.
So how is, let's kind of tease out what you were just saying about the way the models compare to each other, and maybe some of the differences and some of the concerns you have about those similarities and differences.
Sure. Okay. So for background, reading for some of maybe your more, the readers who want to know what I'm talking about, I recently finished a book called Making Sense by Simon Penney, who is a sculptor and a professor who worked at MIT and is now at a university in California. He may be doing other things, but he creates also interactive artworks, contemporary artworks that use robotics and that are sort of at the intersection of exploring how do we know what we know.
Yeah.
And his whole book, Making Sense, was sort of on the history of technology, the ideas on which it was built, and it talked about these two different sets of models and how we tried to build it with symbolic thinking, but it was very brittle, wasn't very flexible, which meaning that it didn't necessarily learn on its own, or if you had to introduce all of the connecting ideas to it in order to make sure that it would output the things that you wanted it to. And again, I'm oversimplifying. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Get in the YouTube comments and tell me things, because I like to learn.
Yeah.
And the other books that I've finished are Artificial Intelligence, A Guide for Thinking Humans by Melanie Mitchell. And I think that came out in 2017, if I'm correct. That was a really good but very deep explanation of how the current models work. And of course, it's 2024 now. So all of these things that Melanie Mitchell works in artificial intelligence. Simon Penney works with robotics. And then, let's see, I've also read that famous Gödel Escher Bach book, which came out ages ago. My father's a software engineer, so there's all of my background. Yeah. And I remember thinking, computers are so smart. I can type this thing into my Macintosh when I'm 10 and make it say things, and it reads things funny, and I didn't really know what I was playing with. But so the symbolic models were very much manually connecting the concept of sight to eye. You would have to intentionally map everything that you wanted sight to connect to eye, and you would input all of this information. It was very heavy on the preparation stages and a lot of human involvement. The probabilistic models, and again, I'm going to get this wrong because it's been a while since I've read those books and I'm not an engineer, but they talk about layers. So there's it's sort of, there's layers and there's training, and you have to train a model to understand something, and it will understand something not by being told exactly what the connection is, by what the connections are not. It'll judge whether or not it's accurate by how many times it actually succeeds, and it'll just do more of the thing that succeeds. So in that sense, it sort of mirrors our synaptic patterns. This is where people get really excited about the potential for describing, oh, it's almost exactly like our brains. It will do more of the thing that succeeds, sort of like an addiction or something, or a reward system, right? Because a reward system exists without addiction, but you have to have the reward system to get the addiction. Um, so these models are sort of built along that concept, but there are things that it does at levels that we do not see or understand necessarily. And I am very ill equipped to describe exactly how that works. So go read Melanie Mitchell's book because she
Yeah.
describes it. She knows what she's talking about. And I really struggled to understand it, but I worked really hard at the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But the idea is that you let the model discover for itself, and it's the captcha stuff where identify the cat, identify the, like, learning to predict and identify um, images, voices, words, among many many other things. But it's all about okay, what is the most likely predictive text is what is the most likely word to come after this word.
Yeah.
And they do that by studying word pairs in large documents and analyzing that.
Yeah.
And then there's layers of systems. So if you imagine, like, this is again oversimplification, but like there's an equation that scans for pairs of words and then puts them in a database. And then there's another like equation or algorithm that scans the database for the number of things and looks at that number. And then those things are fed into another thing and it does all this stuff. And then it comes out with like, oh, and then you present it to the humans and the humans are like, this isn't working. And then you're like, oh, okay, we got to retrain the model. And
Yeah.
then they go back and adjust all the things. So, but instead of saying like sight equals eye, it's here's a whole bunch of stuff, sift through it and see where you see the most connections.
Yeah.
Again, which mirrors how humans kind of learn and work. And I think that's why when you hear techno optimists talk about AI, that's why they're so excited about it, because it seems to mirror the way that we learn
Yeah.
as humans.
Yeah.
And I say seems to very intentionally.
Yes. So quick comment, and then I want to explore that seems
Yes,
to a
please,
little
please,
bit.
please.
So I recently revisited a book by a Bible scholar whose name is escaping me at the moment, but it's all about relevance theory as a way of understanding and interpreting text, and particularly trying to think about how the culture within a text is born has a certain understanding of what's relevant to them that gets kind of embedded in the text and carried forward, but the relevance structures of a culture then change over time. And so one of his arguments from this like relevance theory approach is that it is important for us to understand not just what's relevant for ourselves, but also what was relevant for the at the time in which a text was produced.
Well, this is literary criticism all over again.
Yes, yes. And so it is a lot of that, but one of the interesting things that this kind of brings up is one of the ways in which he talks about relevance theory is it has a sense of embodiment as well. Like, because all words are symbols that represent something. And when a word is spoken, then it comes to you and it opens up several avenues of meaning. And it's actually his argument is like we tend to go with the most relevant thing given the example. And so where I'm seeing this kind of connect is it seems like this same kind of thing is happening with the AI, but what's interesting with us is that we actually live in the world and thus that kind of tunes our what's relevant, whereas the AI just exists in this isolated space, right? And so there's not this real tangible way of fine tuning what is relevant versus what is not. Does that make sense?
That is one of the arguments that Simon Penny makes in his book.
Okay.
Yeah. It's an excellent book. It's really dense. And I would say it's not user friendly
Yeah.
to use more computer terminology. Melanie Mitchell's book is a lot more approachable. Simon Penny's is if you really like you've really got to wanna You've really got to want to sit with it. But he does make that argument that there are limitations to how you can know what you know through forms of technologically mediated intelligence. And this is true for anything with which we use a measurement or a device with which to interact with the world. I'm thinking immediately about histories that I've read of modern medicine, about how strange it was to have a doctor listen to your heart instead of talking to the patient, that the way that we understand how to know about someone's illness has been changed by the fact that we use so much technology in medicine now. And people complain about not being understood. And many patients go for years without being diagnosed because they're not listened to. So like there are ways of knowing that we forget as a culture because we rely on certain technologies. And that doesn't mean that the technologies were made for no reason, or that they don't serve a purpose. But the tool becomes the master if you're not careful about it. So I think that's what you're getting at. That, and there's also people who theorize that an artificial intelligence, if one is born, is not at all. I mean, this is why people are scared of it, because if an artificial intelligence exists in non-human space, it is not going to have the same set of assumptions or rationales for the way that it acts in the world. It's going to behave mysteriously and erratically and possibly massively destructively because it doesn't understand some fundamental things about it. Can only be told about them. But you can be told about what it's like in a place, but you don't know what a place is like until you go there. So
this is the difference between what C.S. Lewis would call looking at versus looking along. And so the lack of embodiment means that you don't have an internalized understanding. You just have a theoretical.
There's a quote I really love that gets repeated, and I don't remember the original attribution, but it's the map is not the territory. This is, like there's the map, and then there's what happens when you get on the ground. And the only accurate map is one that's made on a scale of 1 to 1, which means walking in the actual universe.
So let's take this a little bit more at a practical level. So all of this like scary AI stuff, right? If we take the scary AI stuff, how do you think that this affects life as an artist and life as a Christian?
I do think that there are existential consequences to AI, in the sense that, oh man, I've been thinking a lot about the parallels to transportation in the US, that we created our transportation system based on cars. And that has an effect on the way that you have to live your life if you are living in parts of America that do not have other forms of transportation. It is assumed that you need a car. Your life depends on a car. There's no escaping the fact that you will have to learn to drive and be on the road. That didn't always used to be. And I almost feel like we're in the same, this happens again and again with technology and adoption. So when I hear people being like, I'm kind of like, well, we've been screaming about technology for ages now. Like, let's think about what this one means. There are people who want to run away from it, and that's absolutely valid. And there's a lot of reasons to do so, and I'm trying to as well. But it is going to become a part of the infrastructure. It already has become a part of the infrastructure. And I think that what I don't want to see Christians doing is making the mistake and thinking that they can completely escape it. I think that we can make very intelligent decisions around our use of it. I think that you can go and seclude yourself and protect yourself and try to live without it as much as possible. I do believe that that is always possible. But I also know that you have to understand, you need to be able to understand it and think intelligently about it and understand what it's doing. That doesn't require you to use it, but it does require you to listen. And I think it's very difficult. It's very difficult to listen well about these topics because it's really easy just to let it become a talking point. Um, I don't know that I might have much more to say about that, except maybe that our self understanding, our cultural self understanding, I should say, is likely going to become more fragmented and mistrustful
Mm-hmm.
and scattered and confused as a result,
Yeah.
at least for a time. You know, the thing about life is that there's always going to be something interesting coming around the corner. So we
Yeah.
can't, you know, I can only see what's happening now, and I think it really is a lot more confusion um and upset. I don't I do think that there are so many dangers in terms of scams and in terms of misleading information that tugs at your emotions
Mm-hmm.
for good and for bad. And I'm not just talking about elections or politics. I'm
Yeah.
talking about everyday stuff,
Yeah.
even psychology, like everyday psychology. So anyway, I'm gonna pivot to artists.
Yeah.
there's a really there's a really great book. I mean, unless you want me to stop and you have a thing to say.
I mean, just in
Sorry.
no, not at all.
Yeah.
Just in response to that, it's got me thinking. I attended a lecture today on, um, it was a Catholic scholar who studies Martin Luther, which is just a really interesting thing. And he was talking about how the printing press affected the whole dynamic of the Protestant Reformation and how it really caused in Europe a lack of trust in the reliability of information. Um, and we're going through the same thing right now. And it's a point that he made, and it's a point that I kind of anticipated him making. And so I think with the introduction of the internet and then also the introduction of AI, what you kind of come to is this moment where everything kind of explodes for a period of time, and then you kind of have to watch how the dust settles in order to be able to make sense of the world. I'm also thinking about how this kind of disembodiedness of AI feels a lot like Cartesian rationalism in its disembodied philosophical aspirations. And that that lack of connectivity, it's interesting that that has kind of led us to this moment where now we have a technology that is all about the disembodiedness and calculating power. Um, and yeah, I'm not really sure what to do with that. But as I was hearing you describe this, that's what kind of came to mind. So I don't really have any firm conclusions about that. But anyway,
You know, in some ways, I want to argue against the disembodiedness of it because the
okay,
internet has a body. The
that's
internet has
fair.
to exist in the physical world. Um, AI has to exist in the physical world. You can shut it off.
Yeah. Yeah. I know that's definitely true.
um, yeah, we can shut it. We can shut it all off if you know no one's going to do it because there's so many incentive to keep it going. But and a lot of people depend on it being there. So the internet's here to stay for sure. I
Yeah.
was thinking as you were talking about how we had to reestablish norms of uh, trustworthy sources on the internet.
Hmm.
People had to establish, like, especially scientists and academics and other people who are trying to make make logical arguments for a living or just even trying to like find their way to a place that they want to get to. Like, which place am I going to go that's going to map me safely to where I want to go?
Yeah.
So it took us a while to figure out, well, what are the authoritative sources of things on the internet? It's going to take us a while to figure out, okay, what is the authority, like what is going to happen here? This is a different animal for sure. Um, yeah, it is wild. He's not wrong. He's not wrong about that. I also think it's incredibly disruptive for artists and writers and musicians. Um, and there was a really excellent book with the most depressing title that echoed a historic title. So there's two different books called The Death of the Artist. One is a very famous historical title. The other one is a fairly recent work of from an economist named William Dereshowitz, and he wrote in 2020 about sort of at how the rise of the technological middleman has coincided with a shift in the way that artists make their living, and how a lot of the way that you can make your living as an artist in the commercial realm is through intellectual property. And who controls the intellectual property? It all flows through this mediated digital technology and other, it's excellent read. And I think that AI has added a complicating factor to that, because it will and has shrunk the number of available opportunities for artists working in certain areas, and made like upped the ante in some ways. Like in some ways, it's kind of nice that it's like, well, it does make certain things more accessible, but it also is very ethically questionable based on how they've trained most of the models. Not all of the models out there are trained questionably, but and then there's a really wonderful artist named Holly Herndon who works specifically with AI models and has created an opt-out platform for artists, and also offers like open source models for artists to use to be able to train their own works on privately sourced models so that they own their own intellectual property. And so there's lots of things going on in the art world, but I really want artists to be able to make a living doing what they do.
Yeah.
And the best way to future proof that is to do something that computers can't at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing, this also connects to what you were saying about people mistrusting information. And I was thinking about how it means, I know that for a long time, since the 90s, the product online for the artist and for the person is you. But now you can create your own avatar. You can even create a fake person to embody a brand or embody a fake singer and try to make money doing that. Like there's like crazy ways to create something from almost nothing, but you're really working on the backs of whatever people and things these models have been trained on.
Yeah.
But the difference is that that's not art in some ways, because I'm going to say it's not art, but then there are also pieces of me that are going to loop around and acknowledge that there are parts of it that are art, and I'll explain later. But it's not art because the artist intentionally synthesizes things together in a way that is unrepeatable because each human is unrepeatable. And you could argue that about AI, that the things it makes are unrepeatable, but they're not drawing from the cosmos. They're drawing from whatever pool of things that we put into them.
Say more about that.
Well, man, I mean, we've just got the whole bucket lying around out here, and AI's only got what we've told it.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think that's part of what I meant by the disembodiedness of it, right?
Yeah.
Like, despite the fact that it does exist in a physical space, there's a way in which its experience of the world is being mediated in a way that ours isn't.
Yeah, it's an animal in a cage.
Yeah. And, I mean, there have been many sci-fi movies about that animal breaking out of that cage and what that could do. And so,
It
um,
already has, but it's inside our hearts. That's the thing. Is like that
mm,
it's using the things that are in our hearts to do the things. It's not,
yeah.
yeah. Don't
Well,
don't think that it's tame. It's not tame.
yeah. Well, and that's also interesting too, because it's almost become a black mirror, right?
Yeah.
We're staring at ourselves, but the darkest version, and that's
Well, and then
at
there's,
least in some senses.
we could go down the tangent of like the AI models and end up embodying the prejudices of the people who train them,
Hmm.
and the prejudices of the data that's fed to them, or the omissions. Not even prejudices. Let's
Yeah.
just talk about omissions, whether accidental or intentional. And so it's a crazy place. And so I know that I've made it a point. I've experimented with AI. I've made work that's used AI. I actually had a piece that made it into like a local video projection, and I was like super surprised because I don't know, whatever. But I found that I didn't return to it. I didn't return to it because it didn't feel engaging. And I say that, and I also have a friend, an artist friend who suffers from MS and is disabled, and that is one of the ways that she spends her time creating. Is that she trains an AI model, an open source AI model platform on her own physical work, and then creates these digital pieces because she is unable to work all the time physically.
Yeah.
And it's easier on the computer. So, you think about these tools, but then you also think, well, it's almost like unintentional the way that this can turn into something good. There's unintentional bad and there's unintentional good.
Yeah.
So
It's a mixed bag and it's really complicated. That's
yeah, so
interesting.
I think my final thing is like just study it. Know that it's a part of our technological infrastructure. And this is like where I'm preaching.
No, please.
um, be media literate in it. And remember that it comes from no, oh, this loops back around to a thought that I wrote down. Thoughts are things.
Yeah.
Thoughts become things.
Yeah.
Um, our ideas about the world come to fruit in the world. And you mentioned Cartesianism and dualism. AI and many of our technologies that we use every day assume that Cartesian dualism and also are pointed towards post-humanism. So if you are using these technologies and you are noticing that you are anxious and you like, or you are feeling like, I gotta go touch grass, like they say, like
Yeah.
there's a reason for that,
Yeah.
because you're inhabiting an intellectually assumed space that is not friendly to your body.
Yeah.
So
Well, I feel like a lot of the cultural anxiety that we are experiencing, both like at an individual level, but at a broader level, is driven by the fact that we've created a space that we weren't designed to inhabit.
no, yeah,
And it's just
yeah. But
it's
then
our
okay,
own. Yeah.
but then I absolutely love sci-fi stories, which is all about humans being in a space where they're not designed to live. So,
Yes. Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, there are limits to that critique too, right? I mean,
right, yeah, yeah.
when the technology of the brick is invented in the Bible at the Tower of Babel, God doesn't say anything. It's when they use the bricks to then
Yeah,
build a
to
tower to
build the tower.
dethrone God that it becomes a
Hmm.
problem. When the technology becomes the means of your own exaltation or your own disconnection from your nature, right? And
Yes.
so the but at the same time, a brick is a lot less um, disconnecting than an AI model tends to be,
Yeah.
right? Like the technologies aren't also value neutral, to your point about the way that these current
Yeah,
technologies are pointed in a direction.
that is one of the things that we do habitually assume is that all technology is value neutral.
Yeah.
And I remember when NFTs were coming out, and when I was first coming out, and thinking to myself, the people who are going to make money off of these things are the people who already have access to all of the knowledge, all of the resources, financial or social or circumstantial, to do things with this. Because the narrative that I remember reading in these stories is like, oh, this is going to make art so accessible. The NFTs are going to make it so that artists can make money off of the royalties of their work. But then I realized, well, what does that matter for somebody who like doesn't have running water?
Yeah.
Like this is only like what is the circle of people for whom this benefits? And so often I see, and I say this with love towards my fellow entrepreneurial friends with whom I've worked with very closely in the software world and all of that, that it can be a little bit of a bubble where you talk about innovation, but it's only mediated through the computer. So it's like, okay, we already made the computer. Can you make something else that's not on the computer?
Yeah.
Right? Let's make something that's as innovative as the computer, but that's not on the computer, because guess what? The computer can't solve all the world's problems.
Yeah.
Only Jesus does that.
Yeah. Yeah. So with that, let's talk about we'll start to slowly transition now.
Sure.